the light. Boom, 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 boom. All right, welcome. Welcome back to Play.Hype.Dialogue. We are talking this week about the amazing Netflix musical, Tick, Tick, Boom. This is Mela and Carlos. We are missing Omar this week, but that's okay. He'll be back with us shortly. Carlos, what up?
I am good. I'm really excited to talk about this show today and to talk about the life of Jonathan Larson and his legacy and musical theater. I am ready to jump in.
I'm very excited too. I watched Tick, Tick, Boom for the fourth time yesterday and prepped for this, so pretty hype. I know you were into it as well. And I also know we were going to chat a little bit at the beginning of this episode about some other stuff that's going on in media and pop culture and also the world. So one thing, fun tidbit, is that The Godfather actually turned 50 this week, or is turning 50, on March 15th, which is pretty interesting just because in our Luca episode, I went off on this conversational tangent that did reference The Godfather. So if you didn't get to hear that and you're interested in, Italian American representation or The Godfather, or you just love to hear me speak, which is also fantastic, go back and check that episode out. But the New York Times did some fun coverage of it as well, with an interview with Al Pacino. It's always kind of interesting. There's some fun footage available on the internet somewhere of folks auditioning for the roles.
Oh, wow.
So it's just pretty incredible. 50 years later, still big movie, still considered one of the greats.
Yeah, no, it's definitely up there. Like when people talk about like classic film, that's one of the top movies in 50 years. Oh my God. Yeah. It doesn't feel like that. Like the last time I watched it, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago.
It really doesn't. And it's like sometimes I watch films from like 1998 and I'm like, wow, this is so dated. You watch The Godfather and it really does not feel that dated.
Yeah, I mean, clearly that's one of the hallmarks of a good movie.
Very true.
Jumping forward in time while also going back in time, question mark. The season 2 trailer for Bridgerton is out. It is hot.
I see. It's a little saucy.
So we did an episode on season 1. We are coming back for season 2. I am personally very excited because the people are beautiful. I will speak for myself. The people are beautiful and I love to watch. There's one scene with Anthony in the water in his white shirt that is like clinging to his body. And I'm like, sir, I know the actor who plays you is not straight in real life. So please, again, slide into my DMs.
Oh, good tidbits. Good info. Good intel.
The thirst is real on Play.Hype.Dialogue.
Yeah, I think the big thing I saw a lot of people saying was like the chemistry is looking real tight, looking real good. I watched the trailer. I'm very excited. The casting looks on point, and we'll see what happens. I'm excited to see that story go in a new direction.
Yes.
So we'll definitely be covering that in a couple weeks. Speaking of trailers, a trailer also came out for Secrets of Dumbledore, which is the third installment in the Fantastic Beasts Harry Potter spin-off prequel, which comes out in the beginning of April. Meanwhile, She Who Must Not Be Named, you know what author, you know who, continues her online assault against trans rights. Basically, she's been really deciding that this is the hill that she wants to die on, and just really spreading some super problematic and super concerning, but beyond concerning, that's not even the right language, some really dangerous narratives about trans folks as kind of a threat, and especially as kind of a force that like undermines the rights of women and girls. So that sucks because the Harry Potter fandom, the stories have meant a lot to a lot of people, and the fandom has been not a perfect place at all, but a fandom that has like tried to center around the positive themes in those stories. So it was a real bummer for me to watch kind of like a childhood icon just spin off.
Yeah. Nicole Byer in her recent Netflix stand-up special calls her JKKK Rowling with extra Ks for the KKK. Which when I heard her do that whole bit on Harry Potter, I fell out. It was great. But yeah, no, it really makes it difficult to enjoy the new Harry Potter stuff that comes out because she's getting coins from this and she continues to spout her transphobic and transmisogynistic tirades at the same time that we're seeing in places like Idaho and in Texas and in various states in the US where legislatures and governors are trying to pass and signing these bills that would screw over trans youth, would stop trans people from engaging in the life-saving healthcare that they need to get access to resources, information. There's the Don't Say Gay bill, which is going to screw over lots of LGBT youth in Florida that's on DeSantis's desk to sign. Like there's so many levels of fucked up homo, trans, phobic, antagonistic, heterosexist, like all of these really terrible things are happening. And one of the heads of the cultural juggernaut that is the Harry Potter universe continues to like align herself with these voices that are leaning far right and fascist. And it's just really upsetting because now for a lot of people, when they think Harry Potter, they think transphobia rather than like magic and rising above and fighting the good fight, which is just really sad. And then it's like all of that on top of all of the other legal issues we're facing here in the US and then internationally with Ukraine. And there's just so many things happening. But it is nice when we need it to have some escapism, which is necessary and great, but also to engage with art that is political and that has a statement and a message like what we're talking about today. I think that's a good segue. You're on mute.
I'm on mute. Yeah. But I said, yes, that segue is on point right now. And indeed it was. Nice, Carlos. So let's talk a little bit about Tick Tick Boom. It is really refreshing to turn on something that is joyful. I love musicals. So if that's not your thing, that's not your thing. But for me, it's really enjoyable. And then, yeah, that has some explicit kind of political narrative and themes built into the original work and then doubly kind of built into the structure of it as a film, which is leveraging Jonathan Larson's show that he wrote right before Rent to then also tell his story of the years of his life that were kind of leading up to or preceding the phenomenon that became Rent and preceded his death at the age of 35 the night before Rent opened, which is just like a really unbelievably tragic story. When I say unbelievable, of course it's believable because I think many people grew up kind of knowing that story or heard of it. I really enjoyed the film. Well, I guess we'll do initial thoughts and reactions. And all I really want to say is like, I've been saying this, and it's like almost a little bit embarrassing, but I'm going to say it again. I really felt like, not to have like rose-colored glasses, but for me, just the way the themes in this show hit at the time that it came out, I feel like it like was life-changing for me, just in the way that it tracks his journey with creating and doubt over an artistic life and aging. And also just, yeah, like everything, the environment, the story was really, I loved it and it was really impactful for me. I really feel like I've been carrying it with me since I watched it when it first came out. Carlos, what are your thoughts? I know you watched it for the first time last night, right?
Yeah, and then I rewatched it before this as much as I could. As you were talking, like my eyes started to well up. Like it is a really emotional, in ways that I didn't expect it to be. I'm like, oh, it's a musical and it's going to hit me in my feels like many musicals do. There's just something about the way the themes hit in this particular moment of my life. It's something that I know we've talked about before on this show, that you've talked about on your podcast, The Millennial PhD. It's something that's sort of in the zeitgeist right now as millennials and Gen Z are trying to figure out what we're doing with our existence while we're on the brink of climate collapse and war. And I'm not going to get into it because I know that's not why people tune into the show. To like
coming out with climate change in minute 12.
Debbie Downer Carlos, but it sort of, it hit that spot, and the music, it just works really well to tell the story. So the sort of cliff notes, it's based on sort of semi-autobiographical show that he put together that after his death was turned into a musical and has sort of become a phenomenon in its own right. That metaphor of the ticking clock, like tomorrow isn't promised, and we know this, like the pandemic has taught us that there really is no promise for tomorrow. And then sort of looping that in with all of the systems and the way we as millennials were raised, it brought up a lot of those feelings and some of those deep-seated anxieties about getting older, about creativity, about relationship, about disease and dying. It just tapped into so many different things, and I'm still in the glow, or I don't know if glow is the right word, but I'm still in the after effects of watching it for the first time and replaying the soundtrack. It's powerful stuff. It's really powerful stuff.
Yeah. And I will say, I tried to listen to the soundtrack for Tick, Tick, Boom years ago, kind of after I learned about Rent. And then I heard that Jonathan Larson had passed away in this manner, and that there had been a show beforehand. And I could not understand it. I think, I was pretty young and I didn't understand or connect with it. It's weird. If you listen, I think they staged it in 2001, and there's a soundtrack, and on its own, it can be a little bit strange. But what they did with this movie is like they took some of the best parts of Jonathan Larson's work from Tick, Tick, Boom and some of his other work from the show that had preceded even that, which was Superbia, and they just wove it together. They made it so that it was still all his music, and the score of the film is entirely Jonathan Larson, like no co-writer. Like Lin-Manuel Miranda directed it, but he didn't write new music for it, which the first time I watched it I thought maybe he had, but he didn't. They just wove it together. And so it's really beautifully done, kind of tapestry of Jonathan Larson's pre-Rent work that then again also tells his own biographical story,
which is really powerful. It's a really powerful story, and sort of digging deeper into it with Tick, Tick, Boom and learning about his life, it sort of gives a bit more salience to Rent, which for me is how I came to know who he was. I was like in high school, I think, when I saw Rent on stage around when the movie musical had come out. And so that was really my entry point into Jonathan Larson and the power that Rent had, and the careers it launched. And yeah, it's really interesting and beautiful and powerful to be able to look before that and see the road that led to that, and then to know that he didn't get to see where it went, the sort of melancholic sadness, but also beauty in releasing something into the world and having people carry it beyond your passing.
Nice. Yeah.
So I mean, that's how I came to Rent in this story. Do you have a Rent story?
Yeah, definitely. I do. Yeah, I think a lot of people in our generation kind of Rent came out in like the mid 90s. I remember in the late 90s. I actually have a specific memory of like my parents went to go see it. And I was like being a little jerk, and I was like, you're going to see this like something without me, like how come I can't go? And I remember my mom being like, this is like, it's for adults, like, and also like we're not going to take your little to a Broadway show. And so I remember I had heard of it when I was quite young, and then a couple years later discovered it through the Broadway soundtrack during the time period where like I was downloading it from like LimeWire.
Oh, so we're gonna do that. We're gonna have the nostalgia and the throwback today.
So it must have been the very late 90s or the early 2000s, maybe like 2000, 2001 type time period. And I just remember like just loving it. And I think for so many people, Rent had this effect where the music was incredible. The themes felt so salient and so on point. The cast was really diverse and was so really relatable. It felt modern. It was just this electric kind of entryway that we were so privileged in our age group to have when we were relatively young. And I know Lynn always talks about how that changed his perception of what could be a Broadway musical, and that led to some of his work. So you can see the connectivity there, which is kind of cool. I know we've talked about some of the critiques of Lynn. I think we've talked about them on the podcast, but we've also talked about them personally. But nonetheless, like his body of work has been really impactful in and of itself. But for me, yeah, I just loved it. And it made me feel connected to music and performance and dance in a way that I just, memorize all the lyrics and sing them in my room. And I did eventually get to see it on Broadway, which was amazing. And then the movie musical came out, and I actually I think it was 2013, I got to be in a production of Rent when I was living as a dancer in LA, and that was like such an important moment to me and such a wonderful experience.
Were you Mimi Marquez clad only in bubble wrap?
No, I wish I was somebody. No, I was like, like background person. Still great though. Okay, there's not a lot of background people in Rent, so I get to do a lot of this stuff. No, it was a lot of fun. It was fantastic to be part of that. A lot of the people I was in that show with, they're really professional performers now still. Awesome. And some of them are on Broadway or on national tours with big shows and everything. So it was a really professional performance, but it was just amazing to inhabit that show. So yeah, it's been something I come back to every couple of years, I think. But yeah, like you said, like most of us, Rent was the segue into the story about Jonathan Larson. Shall we talk about your favorite musical number or scene from the film?
This is tough. Part of me wants to go with the Carmela rendition of This is the light. Bo, 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 bo. The swimming pool scene. I think just it happens in movies often, and sometimes I'm like, ugh, like it's very sort of a cliche moment, like person gets in a pool and they have an epiphany, but something about it hit different, just like seeing him putting it together and the music coming to life along the lines of the floor of the pool. Like visually it was stunning. Sort of that moment of having your breakthrough, and it's like, I gotta get to a piece of paper, I gotta write this down so I don't forget, and then that becoming the thing. I really enjoyed that scene. 3090. Oh, yeah, 3090. Just, I mean, we're gonna talk about it because we have to.
Yeah.
As time goes on in the episode, but as time goes on. So I think those are gonna be my two, swimming and then 3090. But like all of the musical numbers for what they are really great. I know some people might have some preferences, like they're like, oh, this isn't a great song, but I think they all do what they're supposed to do in the course of the story.
Yeah, definitely. I loved at the beginning and the end when we like shoot back and forth. So 3090, and then also the last song of Fear or Love. Definitely 3090 is popping. I think it might probably be my kind of like special personal favorite. I think again, probably just because it's really resonant, but also you just love everything they do in it. And I love the performance that Andrew Garfield and Robin De Jesus were giving in that. And Sunday was incredibly special. So I almost feel like it shouldn't even be in the running because it was just its whole own other thing. So as one that hasn't been said yet, though, I forget the name, but the scene where he sits down at the piano after finding out that his friend Michael is HIV positive, and he goes and sits, and he sings, when I was younger, Michael and I got parts in West Side at White Plains High. I'm mixing up the verses, but that was popping. Like, come on. So it was good, back to back good, back to back beautiful musical numbers, great movement. Not a ton of dancing because it's not that type of musical in the sense of there being formal dancing, but there's just incredible dance and movement threaded throughout it. Loved it.
It felt really, because we're going to talk about sort of how this has affected us. I think there's a certain level of the way the movement worked. It's like I could see us doing stuff like this in our apartments, like having a game night and then like breaking out into song and just like beat bopping around.
Like, I need more friends that will do that with me. So I know you'll do it, Carlos, but if you're listening and you want to be friends with me like that and fucking break out into song at game night, like, hit me up. I am ready.
Yes, we definitely need more, especially now that we're grown-ups, because I remember everyone would make fun of theater kids and like the theater kids stereotype, but it's like me and my friends have definitely broken out to song in public. To Rent,
were you a theater kid, Carlos?
Yes,
we didn't.
yes.
I can't believe we skipped that. Were you in like? Tell me.
So the first show ever I did was in the 6th grade. I played Rooster Hannigan.
Wait, tell me the Cliff Notes version. Carlos is like, when I was 5 years old,
when I was a young warthog.
When he was a young warthog.
So I did Annie in the 6th grade, and that sort of gave me the bug. I transferred to an arts middle school and high school because they were linked 5 through 12. And so I did music, and then I did TV and film production, which was eventually what the major was called. But during that time, I did 12 Angry Jurors, which is like 12 Angry Men, but with mixed gender casting. And we did Stand and Deliver. So I didn't do any musicals in high school. But yeah, we were singing Rent songs. We were defying gravity. We were doing all of the things.
I was in all the shows. I was always a dancer, you know. So I never had a named part. But I was still popping. So go ahead, be jealous. Let's talk about 3090, which obviously resonated for us in this question of age and aging. Talk to me. That it hit me in the feels when I was listening to the soundtrack in preparation for the film coming out, and I was just like, yes, first of all, I'm 33. I was like, I needed this a couple of years ago, first of all. But second of all, even so, it's just really resonates with that question of getting older and being an artist and feeling like, have I done what I wanted to do? Am I spending my time in the way that I want to, and putting my art and my creativity out into the world?
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, this sense of like time running out. Part of that is tied in with the idea that we have in our society that like you're basically you're stale after a certain age. But I will say, I think our generation is really combating that. Mm-hmm. So I do think that norm is changing, and especially I think it was particularly dire for women.
Oh, for sure.
But for everybody, I think, you know, there's this idea of like, if you haven't done it by a certain age, then like you missed it. Like you're no longer the ingenue or the up and comer. And so to hear him, this like admirable character, grapple with that was like a salve to the soul. Talk to me, Carlos. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that was one of the numbers that hit me in the feels too. I remember turning 30 not too long ago. I'm 32 as of this recording. Gonna be 33 in like 2 weeks. And I was like, oh, like turning 30 didn't feel like a crisis for me. Like some people turning 30 is like, it's a big deal. Like growing up, we saw lots of TV and movies where it's like, oh my God, I'm 29, my youth is over. And obviously that is very gendered and classed and all that. But 30 didn't hit like that. I think because I was going through a spiritual process that sort of was shifting things for me. I was still in graduate school trying to finish data collection and or writing the dissertation. I'm not sure, it's all a blur on the other side. But being in my early 30s, being 32, trying to figure out what comes next, what I should have done by now. Like growing up, I always felt like the mid 30s was kind of it for some reason. Like I had to do stuff by then. I don't know. I felt like there was a clock of some sort, not in the way the sort of tick tick is happening for Jonathan in this show, but am I going to make it that far? And then now trying to be on the other side of the PhD, trying to figure out what comes next, like doing this creative pursuit, doing creative writing, like is it too late? Like, I know logically it's not too late. Like, there are tons of people like Oprah, Alan Rickman, Ava DuVernay. Like, there are lots of people who have quote unquote made it later. Like, it wasn't a youthful thing. And a lot of the people who made it young, some of them had like financial support from families, or like their parents' names are italicized because they're hyperlinks on Wikipedia. Like, it's a different thing, but just thinking about being part of this generation, like that was around for the year 2000, for Y2K, for September 11th, for like COVID. Like we've been through some of these big historical moments, and it's like time keeps moving forward. What am I doing with my life? I just spent 10 years getting a PhD, and now I'm spoiler alert, if we haven't spoken about it, I might not be doing academia going forward. Like, did I just waste 10 years of my life? Did I waste my 20s?
Decade-long fever dream? Sorry.
Like, what am I doing? And like, the pivot I want to make is into something creative, which is like not any easier or less homophobic or racist or sexist than academia is. I'm like, so yes, long story short, I had a lot of feels about that really triggered a lot of my fears about getting older and not having done enough. And like, if tomorrow I go, what are people going to say at my funeral? Like, I know you have an effect on people and that people will remember how you made them feel. And I like to think that the majority of people in my life who would show up at that event would feel that I love them. They would know that that was, they would know that that is something that they got, and that is enough. Like in an anti-capitalist society, like loving people and caring for them is enough. But just the world we live, like, if you haven't seen Tick Tick Boom, stop this episode and go watch it now so you can cry with me.
I mean, it's waterworks for sure, no matter how many times.
Yeah, it's just, and I think we all go through it, but something about being at the juncture he was at writing this in the dawn of the 90s, when a lot of things were shifting and we're dealing with the AIDS epidemic, and now with us going into our 30s in the 20s, where there's a whole new set of problems and still some of the old problems. And like, yeah, I'm gonna stop talking because I'm just talking in circles and not making sense.
No, you are making sense. And you and I have talked about this a lot one-on-one, and I'm sure it's resonating with a lot of people listening as well. And I want to put out there for folks listening, just so we don't only ruminate on the fear part of this question. I do feel that just because something is or has been a certain type of way doesn't mean it needs to continue to be that way. And that's true for our personal individual lives and for our social world. And it's not too late because we're here still. And the beauty, I know this is so hard because sometimes our conditions just like can be crushing, but the beauty of this whole thing, and especially artistic journey, is in the journey and is in the process of doing. And there's that great line that you had brought up as well to me last night when we were texting, Carlos, where his agent says, you start on the next one, and then after that you start on the next one and keep throwing it at the wall and hope something sticks. And that's what it is to be a writer. And I think that's what it is to be a writer. It's what it is to be an artist. That's what it is to be a creative. And that has to be, because it's so scary and it's so challenging in terms of resources a lot of the time, even if you're not just like an independent artist, but if you're trying to do anything different or trying to do something creative, like the fear can just overwhelm you. Yep. So it has to be about the process, because it may or may not, you don't know what's going to hit, and so it has to be about faith in the possibilities that are on their way, and about finding the joy in the process. Otherwise it can just be so soul crushing. So you got this out there, you listening, what up? Over 30 club, over 40 club, what up?
Over 60, over 70,
over 60, whatever.
Everybody.
Got this. Let's talk about that, the nostalgia piece. I felt some pretty strong nostalgia, just because you referenced it a couple of minutes ago, kind of like 90s references and context. My whole heart felt this as I was watching, and like I said, I was watching with my partner, and I said, why are we feeling this way? Like, we were pretty young in 1990, right? A couple years old. And I was just, just the visuals of what was supposed to be early 90s New York just gave me this vibe and this feeling that like, this is the world that like when I was learning what the world was, this was the world around me. Mm-hmm. And so I had this very powerful nostalgia feeling, like this is what adults and like humans looked like when I was learning what people are, you know what I mean? Like, mm-hmm. This is what like my surroundings looked like when I was like learning how to navigate the world. So I love that. That gave me like serious heart feelings. I also said to Carlos that, I don't know, they played that song Love Shack. And did anybody else think that Love Shack was from like 1969? And I'm like, oh, it's a great touch. They're playing music that's like 20 years old then, because, that's just like what we would do right now, is like listen to early 2000s music at a party. Come to find out, that song came out in 1989.
But in fairness to you, the B-52s do have that like 60s like aesthetic to them, with like the hair, the costumes, it's a vibe.
That's where it comes from. But it's just funny, I put it in the episode notes and everything. I looked it up and I was like, okay, never mind. Carlos, how was your nostalgia experience?
It's a period piece and it doesn't feel like one. Like, it's just,
which is how a period piece should be. I just have to hop in here for a second, because we were just talking earlier about how The Godfather doesn't feel like it was made in 1972. And the thing is, it's like sometimes when we do period pieces, we just ham it up and like overdo it. It's like the 70s and there's flowers and revolution in the air. I think the revolution was really in the air, but I don't know if the flowers were as widespread as we think they were. Sometimes we get cartoonish by adding period touches, and I think this did a perfect job. Like, this time period was not that long ago. There was a lot that was different, and there's a lot that people are still people, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason that's important is because I think we do that sometimes when we throw back 100 years too. Mm-hmm. And we're like, I don't know, people were just different back then. And it's like, they weren't, they were just doing awful things.
Yeah.
Just like we are.
Yeah, no, looking at like,
sorry, I just bit all over your nostalgia.
No, it's all good. Because I think about, so my grandma loved to take pictures. Like, she's one of my artistic inspirations, and a way that I sort of forget because it's just the way she lived her life. So she always had a camera, and then she always had her video camera. And so she was always taking pictures and taking video. And so growing up, we would watch my parents' childhood videos. Like, we'd watch my mom when she was a kid. We'd watch her as a teenager. She has mad photo albums. And so just like, you could pull my parents out of those photo albums and put them in these scenes, and they'd fit right in because they were dressed like that. They were like carrying themselves like that. And so it's just, I think that helped to hit the emotional beats that it did, because for our generation, like, we have some of those memories in there. We were watching TV shows and movies, and those were formative for us. And so it taps in, and it's also that 30-year cycle, 20-year cycle thing where it's like, what's old is new again. It's like the 90s are back. We're remaking the Ninja Turtles. We're redoing Power Rangers. And it's like, now we're getting into the 2000s. It's like, oh, we're going to redo those again? Like, the political commentary being still so salient today is like, fuck. Yeah. We haven't progressed as much as we perhaps would have liked looking forward from back then.
Yeah, let's jump into that too, because they do. I mean, first of all, it's like the backdrop of this. I mean, the whole major theme of Rent is the AIDS crisis. And this is hearkening to this time period, and also to the kind of anti-queer rhetoric that was super, super big in the late 80s, into the early 90s. And it feels like we've done a cycle almost, in the sense that like it seems like there was some tangible progress being made, and now we're looping back to a very similar kind of moral majority-esque push. And the thing about us, even progressives who are involved in social movements, is I feel like collectively we have short-term memory. And so we don't always see how our struggles are part of a continuum and how our movements are part of a continuum. Everybody can barely remember a couple of years ago. It's like,
yeah.
I think same thing that you were getting at is like, watching this, it looped me back, like, wow, just in the course of our lifetimes, this is what the cycle has done.
Yeah. And I think to sort of pivot back to what we were talking about at the start of the episode today with these anti-gay and anti-trans bills are very similar in, if not language and outcome for queer folks, that some of these folks like Jesse Helms, who there's a TV spot where he's talking about if gay people just stop being gay, the AIDS crisis would be over. And it's like, that's not the way we handle a pandemic or an epidemic. And it's like, lesson learned, actually, no, not really. But then that history piece is like, we're not teaching history. And there's this whole anti-critical race theory conversation. It's like, most of the people talking about it don't even know what critical race is, or critical race theory is, or that it comes from critical legal studies, or that it has this specific history in this specific set of disciplines that then was adapted to other fields like sociology. It's like, no, what you're talking about is not teaching accurate history. So then we forget that slavery as a historical moment wasn't just people passively accepting slavery. There were tons of slave revolts and tons of rebellions that we just don't talk about as part of our mainstream historical education. We don't talk about all of the Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn has People's History of the United States, Voices of the People History with Arnov, which, while not being perfect texts, do tell some alternative pieces of the story that we're not getting from our textbooks. And so like activists, yes, and social movement people and organizers need a longer historical memory, but I think the US in general needs a better historical memory, because it's like, yeah, we're spiraling in. It's like J.K. Rowling is the moral majority of the late 80s, early 90s. Like,
I don't know her. She don't live here.
She's the Jerry Falwell, the Pat Robertson, like, and I'm not trying to give her too much credit, and she's certainly not the only one, but it's like, yeah, you are infamous for being a transphobe at this moment in history. It's like,
which is unfortunate, because on other stuff she's been all right, which is just like, way to undermine that. Yeah. But anyway, I don't even want to give her more time. But yeah, they don't care what critical race theory is specifically. Nope. What they're using it to stand in for is any kind of education that's race conscious or racism conscious at all, which is like an entire all of US history.
Yes. And now they're throwing sexuality in
Oh,
the mix. Like if heterosexuality isn't a sexual orientation, like if you're going to talk about
right.
mommy and daddy, you're talking about sexuality.
Mm.
But that's not the level the conversation is at. If I sound bitter and angry, it's because I'm
It's
angry.
because I'm bitter and angry. I think this is also this like not that big of a leap to talk about how the Superbia play that was Jonathan Larson's play before Tick Tick Boom. Just if anybody watching this movie, like this play that he must have been writing in like from in the mid 80s, basically into the
Mhm.
late 80s, because yeah.
Yeah, he said 8 years he was working on it. So that's like
Right, right.
82 to 90. Like,
And right, and that was before Tick Tick Boom.
mhm.
And point is, it's a little bit, it's very uncomfortably prophetic in its description of like a society where people are just tied to their little like face tabs, little like squares where they watch the lives of wealthy and powerful people and are just, kind of obsessed with that. And somebody wins like a face award. It's such a strong echo of our social media consumption habit
Yeah.
and everything that comes along with it in terms of fetishizing commodities and
People.
all day, every day, and people and wealthy people. And ooh, I was like, my guy.
So we were saying before we started recording that like just looking at something like the reality television that we consume with like Kim Kardashian and the Kardashian family, like we are doing what he was sort of satirizing in
And it's
his play.
transcended too. It's like reality TV was like the like the late 2000s and the early 2010s, and now it's just like we carry it around with us and consume it in 15 and 30-second tidbits all day every day, and we're all
Mhm.
struggling with it, right? I don't need to ask you if you're struggling with it, audience, because I know you're struggling with it, because everybody is struggling with their mental and emotional health. And I don't mean to rally against social media. Like I use social media all the time. And I like it in a lot of ways,
Follow
but
us on
wow.
Instagram.
Anyway, Melamuzio, Melamuzio. Hit me up. My reels are popping.
But no, I cut you off to make a
No, no,
social
no, you're
media
good.
joke.
That's it. This topic is good. Let's talk about a few other things. I feel we're already running pretty long. So let's talk about, first of all, that Sunday scene
Oh my
was
God.
incredible. I don't think there's much to say except it's like legends only, absolutely beautiful musical theater actors all up in there.
Mhm.
So dope considering what musical theater and performance art has been going through during the pandemic. Dance theater has just been struggling, obviously, and
Mhm.
understandably. Um, so that was incredible. The references that were in there. Carlos, do you have anything to add about that scene? I just feel like if you're not going to watch this movie, like maybe at least YouTube
Mhm. Yeah,
the
the diner
scene,
scene
the diner
Sunday.
scene
Um,
Sunday.
it was so powerful. Like I didn't expect it, so I really went into this blind. Outside of it's about Jonathan Larson's life before
Mm.
Rent, leading up to Rent, so I knew how it was going to end. Um, but seeing that scene with all of these Broadway legends like Felicia Rashad, Chita Rivera, you've got some of the original cast of
I
Rent
said,
there.
not Cheetah Rivera, just popping up out of nowhere. I said, oh shit. So,
Bernadette Peters, like
Bernadette Peters, what
Joel
is
Gray. I did
happening?
not expect it. So just
Mhm.
I read an article, I think it was from Vox, where it talked about Lin Manuel Miranda putting that scene together and trying to coordinate to get everyone there. And just thinking about that in the conversation we had earlier about 3090 and this transition that a lot of us are dealing with right now with like, what does it mean to live this life? What have we done? Where are we going? To give Jonathan this moment that he didn't have, where these legends are in this daydream, in this number, out of time. You've got current day Bernadette Peters talking to in the early 90s Jonathan Larson in this daydream. Like, not all of us get to see the result. Like you mentioned earlier, Mela, that it's about the process, about loving the process and going through the process. And in this moment, he gets to in spirit through Garfield's portrayal, get to have that moment where all these Broadway legends are there singing his song, like bringing to life his vision to share that. And I think that's what made it extra powerful. It's like at first I'm watching the scene and I'm like, oh, that guy looks kind of familiar. That looks kind of familiar. And then it breaks into the song and I'm like, oh my God. And then it's just like boom, explosion gif. Like it just was a touchstone again, sort of doubling down on the power of creation, of making your art, of putting it out there. And it's like what Rosa, Judith Light's character, his agent was saying. It's like, see what sticks. This stuck. You didn't get to
and this
see
was
it,
one of the this was one of the scenes that I thought on my first watch, somewhat ignorantly, that I thought this was one that like Lynn and company had written as their own parody, because it's a parody of a Sondheim song from Sunday in the Park with George. And so I was like, oh, this is, they like wrote this, and then realized that Jonathan Larson wrote it and would do it as a comedic take as part of his show.
Yeah, cholesterol.
Yeah. But then they decided to basically like give it the like a serious treatment. And that was a great choice. So we also have, I think a lot of the thread running through our conversations is the same tension that holds the film together and the story together, which is that tension between fear and love. Right. And there's a moment in the trailer where Robin De Jesus's character says, are you letting yourself be led by fear or by love? And it's in the movie, but in the trailer version, Andrew Garfield as Jonathan Larson answers back, fear, absolutely fear. And that had me on my back. I thought that was so funny. And such like, again, a really resonant audio clip. But I feel like we've talked about that a good amount. So maybe, Carlos, do you have anything to add about that? Or maybe we can move into just talking a little bit more about queer representation and or some of the casting choices for the film.
That's sort of the ultimate statement of the movie. It's like, how are we going to move? I hope with love.
We talked in the beginning of this episode about our early experiences with Rent. And I think a big piece of what hit about Rent for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other people, was that this story of like no day but today. And I was dealing with intense existential threat as a teenager, existential dread as a teenager. And I think that circles back around for a lot of us every so often, if not constantly. But just the idea of like, what are you going to do at the time that you have? And so this is this really powerful theme that runs through his work in his very short time with us. And even though there's a critique, just pivoting into the conversation about queer representation and justice for queer communities, there's definitely a critique to be made that like Rent is held up as like the seminal text on that time period and about the experience of the early HIV/AIDS epidemic and its impact on the queer community. And it's like he was ultimately a straight man who wrote, and then like this is like the go-to cultural phenomenon of that moment in a lot of ways.
Which, full disclosure, I did not know until way too recently. I thought he was a queer man this whole time.
Till last night when you watched the movie.
I plead the fifth.
I love that for you.
In my research, like I was watching the movie, I'm like, oh, he's got a girlfriend? Maybe he's bi. And it's like, no, he's
amazing. I mean, ultimately, it's like, who knows, first of all. But second of all, I think this gets to that question of like, it's not just about who's writing stories, which is really important for representation, but it's about justice too. It's like, what are the stories telling us? And like, what are the themes? And so many stories throw folks under the bus, like throw people who have been minoritized or marginalized under the bus, throw working people under the bus in favor of a different story that uplifts people who are already powerful. So it's not perfect, but stories that honor people that have been shit on or have been experienced poor treatment or have been marginalized is still, I think, those themes are really powerful.
Especially like we've been talking about all episode right now, like we are in a crisis for queer lives. Like,
Mm.
we have legalized same-sex marriage, but in some states you can still be fired for being gay without any legal recourse. Even in even more states, you could be fired for being trans or genderqueer or not having a quote unquote appropriate gender identity. And then we still are dealing with, it's not nearly the same epidemic that it was in the 80s and early 90s, but HIV/AIDS is still a crisis, is still an issue. Housing for people with HIV/AIDS. We talked about the Don't Say Gay bill. We talked about these anti-trans healthcare bills, these banning women in sports, which are banning trans women in sports, which has an effect on, because we are in a white supremacist society, it's Black women and other women of color who are bearing the brunt of that. Cisgender women are being given invasive testing of their genitals and bodies to make sure they are quote unquote real women. There's so many layers and levels to this, and fighting for queer justice, it's like, it's not moral majority today, but it is still some of those same ideas bubbling under the surface and boiling over in a lot of areas of this country and globally. Like, we have right-wing religious right pastors in the US who are not having too much success funding their agendas here, who are taking their monies abroad and funding kill the gays bills in other countries. And so then when we need good queer representation, we need work that does queer justice, and we need people to see it. I hope kids in schools get to watch stories like this and get to see these stories that now their teachers aren't allowed to tell them, because we need to know our history. It's important for us to know our history.
Let's talk real quick, because we've been talking for a while. Let's talk a little bit about casting choices. Obviously, Andrew Garfield, like, I bow down to the
a revelation. I've never said that to a person before, but I texted my cousin and my friend. I was like, Andrew Garfield is a revelation. And he is. He's so great, but so is the rest of the cast.
Andrew Garfield, if you're listening, like, call me. I would like to work with you, not in a romantic way, not being a creep. I'm sure
you
Carlos
can call me for both. If you want to have,
I tried to close the gap because I knew what you was gonna do.
But I would also love to work with you as well.
He said, okay, for me, it's the romantic part.
Swimming lessons. Maybe you want to have some wine.
Carlos said, I do swimming lessons, or you can give me swimming lessons. It's either way. I'm available for teaching or learning purposes. Oh, sorry.
No, he was great. He was so good. He really brought Jonathan Larson to life. Like, I've seen, like, there's a couple of clips of him, the real life Jonathan Larson in the film. And so, like, it works really well. Robin de Jesus is, like, amazing. Like, I remember seeing him.
Great. I'm so happy for him.
So good. I remember seeing him the first time in this movie Camp, which is about a bunch of like teenagers who go to musical theater camp and sort of their dynamics. And so to see him go from that to In the Heights to now The Boys in the Band and Tick Tick Boom, like, it's been really exciting to see his trajectory. And I wish him a long and impactful career because he's clearly on the road.
He was great, and all the vocalists were wonderful. Also Broadway, like, heavyweights, some of them, and some of them, like, more newcomers as well.
I did not expect Jennifer Hudson to be as good as she was. Like,
you don't mean Jennifer Hudson.
Not Vanessa Hudgens. So we're gonna cut that out.
No, you're gonna leave that in. That's some classic shit.
I don't know how I went Vanessa Hudgens to Jennifer Hudson. Like, there's not any.
I guess it's just the Hudgens Hudson.
So yeah, I thought she was going to be a bigger character based on the trailer. Like,
right, yeah.
She comes in, she's like, "What up, boy genius?" I thought she was going to be more of a central character.
Whole movie. No, but I'm glad. I'm good for her, like, for taking this part, because she's, pretty well known. But I feel she probably wanted to be part of this project. And she does a lot of the singing. So
Yeah, and she's done a lot of Netflix stuff. Like she's done like the Princess Switch movies, and so she's really banking like with Netflix, making a lot of money. So when I saw her in it, I was like, okay, Vanessa Hudgens is going to be in it. But then it was so good. Like the one scene, what is it called? Therapy. When
That was the
him
highlight
and Susan are
for
having
her.
their fight, and it cuts from their real life, well, the version of their real life fight to them performing that number on stage. And it's like the face acting, the performance, their energy together. It just, I did not expect it from her. Like, I know she can act and she can sing because obviously High School Musical and all that, but I'm like, she did that. I did not expect that from her, and she did it.
One thing that I think is interesting to note is that Jonathan Larson's work has created the space for basically now years and years of like roles that are available for actors and performers of color to have these amazing roles in Rent for all the years that it was on Broadway, all of the revivals, all of the tours, this film, and not to like posthumously pat him on the back for that, but just in terms of, it's not about him, it's just in terms of thinking about the impact that his work has had materially for just literally hundreds of artists of all backgrounds, and specifically for queer artists and artists of color. I think is one of these things that, like, it's nice to talk about narratives, and it's also nice to think about the material difference that that has made for people who have been able to build stability and build their careers off of these roles that come from his work. And in this case, it's like Lynn, Lynn is at the helm of this, and whoever else was part of the creative team, which I don't have at my fingertips right now, that decided to cast it in this way. And I imagine that the the revival productions of Tick Tick Boom that are definitely coming will continue to cast a diverse performing team and hopefully creative team going forward. And that makes these huge differences in people's day to day.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we know with Rent that it launched so many careers. Like Jesse Williams went on to be on Law and Order. Daphne Rubin Vega went from being in Rent to she was in The Heights, the movie. So like the material conditions are nothing to scoff at, and opening up doors for more different kinds of stories on Broadway, for better or worse, depending on your perspective. With things like Hamilton, like people are getting paid, and those roles have led to other roles. Like we covered One Night in Miami. Would that have happened had Leslie Odom Jr. from Hamilton to One Night in Miami, like,
which amazingly hit Leslie Odom Jr. and Lynn and Karen Olivo did a production of Tick Tick Boom right before Hamilton came out that there's clips of on YouTube. Yeah.
I just learned this just now. Thank you. I'm gonna have to
Okay.
find these clips and watch them.
And I was just like, oh, you guys.
Which is the other thing. So it's like when we look at Hollywood, a lot of people have their people, and so they constantly use people. They bring back the same actors. Like
People have the people that they collaborate with.
Yes, frequent collaborators. I was gonna try to think of an example, but then I couldn't, except for like
DiCaprio and Scorsese.
Oh, that's a great example. Yes, like DiCaprio and Scorsese constantly producing great work together. It seems thus far
Can't believe Chris Jackson wasn't in Encanto. Did I make that joke the first time, or did I just
think so? But like Lin-Manuel Miranda has used some of the same actors in his various projects. So like Philippa Sue was one of the people at the Legends Sunday brunch scene. Karen Olivo did Tick Tick Boom with him, and then she was in the Heights. And so when more people get into the room and more people get to be in charge of creative decision making, they are going to bring more new people with them. And so there's more opportunities for things to come in, for things to grow. So just, I can't wait to see more.
Samesies. Anyway, we loved it. It's too bad Omar's not here because I feel like he might be able to offer like a little bit of a different perspective since you and I just fell over each other to praise this. So I'm sure there's definitely some critiques or some things that don't exactly hit, but I think for you and I, it just the themes really resonated. And it makes me emotional to see joyful, justice-oriented narratives put out into the world. And so it really filled my heart. And I hope that everybody gets to check it out.
Definitely gonna
Hope
watch
Andrew
it again.
Garfield wins his Oscar, but I don't know
We'll
about
see.
that, but I'm into it. So yeah, that's it. Carlos, do you have any final thoughts?
I think we hit all of the big things. Again, if you haven't seen this film, I definitely recommend you check it out. You can listen to the soundtrack. Definitely look into Rent if you are so inclined and not really a musical theater fan. This still might be up your alley.
And hit us up with what you think on Instagram at Play.Hype.Dialogue, or you can follow Carlos at Carlos Creates 2018. Or you can follow me at Mela Museo on Instagram and let us know what you think, or you can email us as well.
We're gonna give our hype stars.
Oh my God, I'm gonna put hype stars. It's 5 for me. I loved it.
Oh, I think I want to say 5 too, but part of me is like maybe 4.5.
I know you want to stay 4.5. You don't got to be like all the time.
I mean, what would be the rationale for me saying 4.5? Like, I would need to defend it, right?
I don't know, you told me.
I'm looking at you like, give me the answer. Give me I'll do 4.75.
Fair enough.
Yes. That's it. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in. We out.
Bye.
Bye.